University in Palo Alto, California. I'm Amy Goodman. Maoist rebels in Nepal say an end to monarchy is near following their surprise victory in last week's national elections. The Communist Party of Nepal is expected to come out with more than half the seats in the Constituent Assembly when final results are released. Maoist officials say one of their first orders of business will be to abolish the monarchy and declare a republic. The elections came out of a 2006 peace deal that saw the Maoists end their uprising against King Gyanendra. Gyanendra had been forced to give up his absolute powers following a groundswell of protest against his rule. To talk about what this election could mean for Nepal, I'm joined by two guests in the Firehouse studio in New York. Kashish Das Shrestha is a freelance journalist, photographer, producer, host of the podcast In Conversation on samudaya.org. And joining me on the line from Nepal is Mary Des Chenes. She's an anthropologist and human rights activist who's worked in Nepal for over 20 years. She's the editor of the Kathmandu-based journal Studies in Nepali History and Society. Why don't we start with you, Mary Des Chenes, in Kathmandu. Tell us what is happening there now.
Hello, Amy. What's happening in Nepal right now is great relief and a tremendous amount of happiness on the street.
I can hardly.
This vote has come clearly not just from the Maoist cadres and devoted supporters, but it's come from across the country, every region, less in one region only. And it's come from across classes and across parties. The two main parties that have dominated electoral politics, which was reinstituted in 1990, have suffered historic defeats, meaning that their own voters have gone over to the Maoists and have said with one extraordinarily clear voice that we want very fundamental change, very crucial economic change, and that's a great challenge that now faces, one of the great challenges that now face the Maoists, as they are now 2 votes away from taking a majority in the first-past-post side of the election, with quite a few constituencies to go. And it's looking like the other side of the proportional election side, proportional representation side of the election will definitely give them a majority in the Constituent Assembly.
Kashish Das Shrestha in the studio in New York. How surprising was this victory, the Maoist victory?
Well, everybody was actually taken quite a bit by surprise, except with the Maoists themselves, actually, I think, because nobody really predicted the Maoists to have such an overwhelming turnout for themselves at the polls. Everybody thought, the international community, the local media, all the analysts assumed that this election would be a way to keep the Maoists engaged in the democratic process. The UML would probably come out on the first place, and Nepali Congress would probably show up second, and the Maoists would come somewhere in the third place. And basically, that was the general analysis that we had even till the day of the elections. And then the polls close, and Thursday evening, Friday morning, we start counting the polls, and the results indicate that the Maoists are in the lead. And now, I guess, everybody's just waiting to see how this turns out. But everybody was indeed taken by quite a surprise. Not just the local journalists that, there's been a lot of conversation in Kathmandu that the media elite in the valley got it wrong. But it's just not just in Kathmandu. I think everywhere people just got it wrong of how the Maoists turned out.
Can you describe who the Maoists are?
The Maoists, actually, they've been engaged in politics for several decades now. They were underground for 10 years before launching their Maoist armed struggle in 1996. And since then, they've been underground too. As you mentioned earlier in the program, it's only been 2 years that they've come out of the jungles and joined the peace process. And actually, it's been a year since they joined the government. April 2007 was when they officially joined the interim parliament in Nepal and took up 5 portfolios in the cabinet. But there's a good chunk of the Politburo members are all politicians, of course, but they also have a pretty strong People's Liberation Army, which people have very vivid memories of in the countryside and in Kathmandu.
How did they build their support?
The Maoists have, to their credit, they were the first vocal group to aggressively pursue the idea for Republic Nepal, the end of the monarchy, and they have worked federally towards the marginalized community groups in Nepal, and that's one of the reasons that they've had such a strong showing in the polls this election. The fact that they were fighting to end monarchy and to give the marginalized communities in Nepal a voice.
Can you talk about the leader of the Maoist rebels?
Prachanda, the leader of the Maoists, Prachanda, the fierce one, as is always quoted in the press, is he's been underground too, and he was sort of the mysterious leader of the party. But the last 2 years has given the Nepali people a chance to see him, and there's various ways people look at him, but I think Baburam Bhattarai, the second in command of the Maoist party, is sort of more in the attention right now because there's a lot of talk that he might in fact be appointed the next Prime Minister of Nepal. And just recently there's an interview of him published in nepalitimes.com, and he goes in great length actually to talk about the kind of economic changes and reforms that they plan to make in the country and some of the ideas that they have for Nepal.
Can you talk about his history, his rise to power?
Prachanda's rise to power or Baburam's?
Yes. No, the leader of the Maoist rebels.
Prachanda has, he's always been a hardcore leftist, but he comes from a poor family background also. He comes from rural Nepal, but I haven't really studied him very well, so I wouldn't be able to give you the kind of details that you might be hoping for.
Well, let me ask Mary Des Chenes in Kathmandu how he rose to power. Who were his influences? Mary Des Chenes? Yes. Can you talk about his influences and how he rose to power over time? Mary Des Chenes.
Yes. Let me start just by correcting one point. The Maoists were in the parliament up to the 1993-94 elections, just 2 years before they started the armed struggle. They had been underground, as had pretty much all parties prior to 1990, but they had come into electoral politics, and they were the third largest force in the parliament. An army operation was taken out against them during the elections of 93-94, and it's after that they left the parliamentary process. They were at that time not called the CPN Maoists. They were part of the CPN Unity Center, and this is where Prachanda's influences come from. There are 2 or 3 lines of influence inside the communist movement of Nepal, very broadly speaking, influence from China and influence in terms of ideology from China and from the Soviet model, and also importantly from the Naxalite movement in India. Prachanda comes out of the side of that of the Communist Party that has very much followed their version of Mao's mass-line politics, which you can gather from them calling themselves the CPN Maoist. He was part of CPN Unity Center and came out of that side of the communist movement. The CPN UML, United Marxist Leninists, which has been in the parliament through these 18 years and is here discussed as the reformist left, is the mainstream that has come out of the Soviet influence line of the communist movement here, broadly speaking.
Can you talk about the U.S.'s designation of the Maoists as a specially designated terrorist organization?
Yes, Jimmy Carter was here himself, along with people from the Carter Center, as one of the international monitors in the election, one of the groups monitoring. And one of the things he said very clearly in his press conference at the end of that, in declaring this to have been an extraordinarily free and fair election, was that it is time for the United States to rescind that designation. We have the curious situation, I would say now, in which the Maoists have done. They have left armed struggle 2 years ago at this point. They have exercised as they point out, one of the most democratic forms known to democratic politics in urging and then now carrying out a constituent assembly election. And now they've massively won in a tremendous mandate in that election. So either the Bush administration would need to say something like that.